Greetings, my fellow YouTubians. I've entered the home stretch, at long last, of my rather extended series, the 20-Year Film Festival. I am recommending 14 movies from each of the last 20 years, starting with 1995. 14 equaling basically one movie per day in a 2-week film festival, if that's your fancy. Of course, a lot of these you've seen before, but hopefully a few of them you haven't, and you will be interested in checking them out at some point. 2012 is where we're picking up here, and the first movie I'd like to recommend is one of the most incredibly outrageous flops of all time, which is called John Carter. John Carter made my top 5 of that particular year. And I understand why it flopped. I understand that it was marketed very poorly, but what I don't understand is why people don't like it. This could seem derivative of a lot of other movies, because the source novel by Edgar Rice Burroughs is served as inspiration for a lot of those movies that the movie appears to be ripping off. But really the movie is its own thing, and I find it to be spectacular. I think it's a great adventure movie with incredible effects and visuals, and it's really disappointing that that it was so unsuccessful and that it is not well regarded, as well regarded as it ought to be. Because I think there are a lot of movies that made a ton of money that are way less deserving than this movie. It was directed by Andrew Stanton, who, of course, it was his first live-action movie after directing a few Pixar movies, and I just think it's terrific. Anyway, on to the next thing. Ruby Sparks. Ruby Sparks is a comedy that is co-directed by Jonathan Dayton and Valerie Faris, who did a lot of really cool music videos before they made Little Miss Sunshine, which was a Best Picture nominee. Ruby Sparks is a sort of what they call magical realism type of film, where something fantastical happens even though it isn't necessarily science fiction. There's a writer, the main character is a writer played by Paul Dano, and he creates a character named Ruby Sparks who then just sort of pops up in the flesh. And he finds that his writing, when he writes about her, that actually influences who she is and what she does. Ruby is played by Zoe Kazan, who wrote the screenplay and is also the other half of the couple that the real-life couple that Paul Dano is a part of. Who else is in this movie? Annette Bening and Antonio Banderas play Paul Dano's parents, or at least Antonio Banderas is his stepfather, I guess exactly. Anyway, there's some really, really crazy stuff happening when he writes, and it affects his behavior, and it makes him sort of question reality and question what it is that he needs in a partner in his life, because here is this woman who will be anything that he chooses her to be. Anyway, it's a really interesting movie, and it's a lot of fun. Perfect Sense. Perfect Sense is a movie, an English film. Takes place in London, if I'm not mistaken. It's directed by David Mackenzie, who did Hallam Foe. This is another sort of one of those, I guess you could say, not necessarily magical realism movie, but there's an unexplained thing happening here. Everyone around the world is losing each of their 5 senses. I think starting with smell, or maybe it's taste, I forget exactly. But the main character is a chef, a professional chef, played by Ewan McGregor. He meets Eva Green, who is I think a biologist studying this phenomenon and why this is happening and how to prevent it from happening. And they meet and they get romantically involved. And then, as the story progresses, their relationship progresses, and people keep losing more of their senses, which is a challenge for him because he's a chef. He has to create dishes that are appealing even though people can't taste anything. Interesting movie, really interesting. Also, I would hate to be Ewan McGregor's wife, because she would not want to see this movie. Ewan McGregor appears to be enjoying his bedroom scenes with Eva Green way, way too much. Yeah, it's a terrific movie, really good. Bernie. Bernie is a movie directed by Richard Linklater, one of my favorite Richard Linklater movies, and he's made some real corkers. Bernie is based on a true story about a mortician in Texas, who's played by Jack Black, who, of course, was the lead in Richard Linklater's School of Rock. He's a very, very generous, giving guy. He's always very getting involved in the community, and especially getting involved with the elderly people in the town where he lives. And he strikes up a friendship with a very bitter, rich old woman played by Shirley MacLaine, a woman who hardly anybody in town likes, but he sort of ingratiates himself with her and does everything he can to sort of make her happy. And then she sort of like takes over his life and just demands that he spend all his time with her. And of course the movie revolves around the trial because she's found dead and Bernie is accused of killing her. The really crazy thing about this movie is that there's a lot of on-camera interviews with residents of the town. People actually knew the people that they're telling the story of, not of course the actors, but the actual people. And then they also appear in scenes alongside the actors, and I was really confused about who is actually acting in the movie and who is actually just playing themselves. But I really like the movie a lot. Another movie that was huge and grandiose but didn't do so great at the box office, Cloud Atlas. Cloud Atlas was co-directed by the Wachowskis and Tom Tykwer, who did Perfume, Story of a Murderer, and Run Lola Run. These three met in 1999 when they were both doing press for their films. Of course, the Wachowskis had just finished The Matrix and had released that. And they hit it off so well that they decided to make a movie together just so they could spend more time together. Cloud Atlas is a novel that's basically involves 6 stories that are all sort of interconnected with each other in an unusual way. And they liked the book so much they decided to make it a film, and 2 of them basically did the 3 of the stories, and Tom Tykwer did the other 3. They wanted to share directorial credit for all of them, just make it, across the board director. But for some reason, the Directors Guild of America, the union that all the big Hollywood directors belong to, they insisted that they include a credit specifically stating which of them directed which segments of the movie, which they didn't care for very much, but I guess they let it go. I got to see this at the Chicago Film Festival and got to see these 3 directors in person. They talked about making the movie. It's a very complicated film. Some of the main characters, some of the lead actors, I should say, are Tom Hanks and Halle Berry, Jim Broadbent, Jim Sturgis, the guy who plays Q now. Gee, I keep forgetting his name. I can't remember. Sorry. Duna Bay, who also appeared in Jupiter Ascending, which was the next movie the Wachowskis made. Yeah, and of course Hugo Weaving. Hugo Weaving is in most of the movies that the Wachowskis do. Yeah, really, really interesting movie. There was never any point which I wasn't involved with what was happening. You'd think that with an anthology movie or movie like this, that some stories would be more interesting and more involving than others. And there's only one story that I find kind of unsatisfying, and that is the one where Jim Sturgis plays the main character. It's the earliest story. In the timeline, it's the earliest story that occurs. But aside from that, I really like the movie a lot. Of course, if you're not a fan of really silly-looking prosthetic makeup, because all the actors play different parts in each storyline, and so they use a lot of prosthetic makeup to make them look different, especially Susan Sarandon's fake nose and the way they get some Caucasian actors to play Korean people. If you don't like makeup like that, then you're probably not going to like this movie. It's probably going to bother you quite a bit. But if it's not important to you, then you probably like it a lot. Steven Soderbergh made Haywire, which was an action thriller. He was inspired by Gina Carano, the MMA fighter. He saw her on TV one night and decided to write a movie for her to star in. So she plays a sort of a special ops individual, someone who works with a team to pull off secret missions and extract witnesses and things like that. She finds herself set up for a murder and is on the run. A lot of really good action in this movie. It's sort of a stripped-down action movie, not a lot of over-the-top CGI set pieces, just a lot of hand-to-hand combat and some shooting, some good martial arts. The funny thing that I found about this movie is the way the music will stop cold when the fighting starts and then immediately pick up again once the fighting is over with. I found that kind of comical. But aside from that, I like the movie quite a bit. Ewan McGregor is in this movie as well. He plays Gina Carano's handler. Antonio Banderas, Michael Douglas, Michael Fassbender, and of course Channing Tatum is in this as well. Channing Tatum famously talked to Soderbergh about his experience as a stripper, which is why Soderbergh then went on to make Magic Mike. Yeah, fun movie, really fun movie. Side by Side is a documentary that I quite enjoyed because I'm interested in some of the technical aspects of movie making. Side by Side is a documentary that was hosted and produced by Keanu Reeves, and he does a lot of the interviews, but it's actually directed by a guy named Christopher Keanly. This is about the differences between filmmaking with film and filmmaking with digital cameras and digital projection. And he talks to a lot of big directors. He talks to his Matrix directors, the Wachowskis. He talks to James Cameron. He talks to David Fincher and Steven Soderbergh. And of course he also talks to a couple of people who are very pro-film, like Christopher Nolan, who insists that film will always be better than digital, no matter how great the resolution of digital is. And actually there are a few directors that argue for or against video in some cases, because the format of video is always changing, whereas the format of film never changes. Film will always be film. Yeah, very, very interesting if you're interested in the technical aspects of filmmaking, which I certainly am. So that's 7 movies, and I'll be back in the next video with another 7 from 2012. I hope you'll tune in for that. Thanks very much for watching. See you again soon.